I'm so happy to have Dr. Joel Marciano, the Director General of the Philippine Space Agency, with me today. Welcome to National Security News.
Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, my first question is probably one that you might hear often, and I probably shouldn't ask, but Philippines has a space program. You know, a lot of people might not even have known that.
Well, yeah, still, it's something that is also we find ourselves explaining even to fellow Filipinos every single day. Because when you look at space, I think it's quite literally distant. But the fact is, our country has many challenges. At the same time, we seek many opportunities. And space is that frontier which is becoming well within reach. And so, yeah, we have a young population as well. And the inspirational aspect of space should not be discounted for a country whose median age is 25 years old, and with 120 million people. So yeah, I talked about the challenges, I talked about the opportunities and the inspirational aspect. And we try to bring space closer to Filipinos by talking about the applications that these technologies in space benefit, how it benefits our daily lives. It's this invisible infrastructure which we kind of depend on every day, blissfully unaware of it. But if we turn off, for example, these satellites for an hour, maybe even a minute, it's not just the global economy that will be disrupted, it's our way of life. So we try to relate it to things like you turn on your mobile phone, you try to go from point A to point B, or try to order transportation or food. Then this phone app relies on at least 4 different space technologies that's working in the background, without which, this app will not work. So the satellites that take pictures generate maps that find themselves on our phones. Our position on the map is calculated by satellites. The data that we send through the maps goes through an infrastructure called the internet, with a part of that infrastructure travels through space. And our commute is affected by the weather. And satellites measure weather. So it's that, I guess, more awareness of the global space economy and the place of the Philippines in that global space economy that we're trying to bring that message to our fellow Filipinos and to the rest of the world.
Well, can we just look at some of the key tenets of the Philippine space strategy, and how did you go about developing them?
Well, I should say it was work done by, first of all, motivated by the Department of Science and Technology in the Philippines, and worked with the Congress in the Philippines, and they got a team, I guess some consultants as well, to work on this proposed legislation. My role then was in some ways parallel to that. We were more focused on developing the technologies, like the small satellites, through a university effort in cooperation with Japanese universities, where we were sending young Filipino students to Japanese universities to build these Earth observation, scientific Earth observation satellites. So that went in parallel. And I guess with the country, the Philippines, facing challenges in terms of climate change, disaster risk reduction and management, food security, environmental protection, name it, volcanoes, earthquakes, typhoons, they afflict our lives. And so the view from space is essential. Building capabilities in that domain would benefit decision-making and policy-making in the country. So that has led to these key development areas in the Philippine space policy, which is national security and development, hazard management and climate studies, space research and development, industry capacity building, international cooperation. So these are all important considerations for the Philippines in looking at space as extension of terrestrial infrastructure. So in the same way that we need roads and bridges and airports, we look to space as infrastructure capabilities that can improve lives on Earth.
Well, in your path of developing this, do you have advice for other emerging spacefaring nations how they could build out their space program?
Well, certainly, I guess, from our experience, there's plenty to share, and we hope that we would have opportunities to do that as well. We've learned a lot. We've benefited from the know-how that has been generated. So I guess the first message is really establishing a space program for some countries that are considering it would be to look at diplomacy, look at international cooperation. First, articulate the national goal and bring it out into the open. Of course, it is helpful for that to be backed up by a national policy, a national space policy, which can carry that message. But there's been a lot of heavy lifting done already in space, and you could build on top of that. You do not have to reinvent that wheel in many aspects. So innovation and value creation from space can be had. If you look at all the things that have been done already, that the heavy lifting I mentioned, where we can now access space through commercial launch, we can take advantage of programs in the ISS, where we work with other countries to send science experiments from young people to that environment. So then there's now that opportunity to build on top of these heavy lifting. I guess there's an expression for that. You stand on the shoulders of giants. So that's something we try to immediately pursue, is look at how we can leverage the advancements that have been made and try to make those, by building on top of that, make the benefits more clearly felt immediately, as soon as possible, and that communicate that to the public. We cannot really, we have to emphasize that, to communicate it, keep communicating, and spread that message. And that's the idea of working with other countries, is to use these developments to build up your own program and inspire the young people in your country.
Well, you're in Washington this week for the forum, but also as part of bilateral space dialogue between the United States and Philippines. Can you share some of the goals you have for this dialogue?
Well, the Philippines and the US have had many dialogues. We've talked about so many things. We've been together in many things. This is the first time we're talking in a government level about space. So this is truly a milestone. And for our agency, which is barely 5 years old, Philippine Space Agency, it is indeed an opportunity to expand Philippines-US relations into this exciting new frontier, to enrich that further. I guess, well, really, it's first of all objectives. In our delegation, our delegation has set out on these objectives, which is first of all to understand current U.S. goals and priorities in space, and by the same token, communicate Philippines' goals and aspirations in space, and look at these existing programs in space science and technology and applications across many institutions in the U.S. And we usually think of NASA, right? But there's other groups involved in space as well that are either downstream and upstream. There's certainly that private sector in the U.S. that is really coming up with many exciting developments. So try to understand, try to identify those programs of common interest in the Philippines and the U.S. in space. And I guess the overarching objective is to try to bring Philippines and U.S. relations into a whole new level, wherein the sky is not the limit. Now, the space is where we should be.
Well, and a couple of nations have now been added as Artemis signatories, which is Slovenia, Sweden, Switzerland. Is there any chance that your government might be considering joining it?
Well, the Artemis Accords, we certainly appreciate the principles of the Accords in terms of the open science and the transparency. It's a good framework for cooperation in space. This is currently being considered by the Philippines, but it goes through a process of consultation, internal consultations on these. We have to gather the different stakeholders in the country and get them into the same room and talk to them about the Accords and how that also on the diplomacy side and on our aspirations for responsible and sustainable spacefaring, how that aligns. So to articulate that and put it in the national interest. So it's under consideration as we speak.
Well, if we look at your expertise in small satellite technology, what role do you think small satellites will be playing to facilitate international collaboration and access to space for the emerging spacefaring nations?
Well, thanks for that question because it does bring me back. That's really how we got started with with the more recent space program. And before there were Filipinos, I guess, engaging scientists abroad. You have physicists, you have people in chemistry, you have engineers. There are Filipinos working in NASA. So it's been the Filipinos are going to other countries with the know-how, gaining more know-how, and even coming back to the Philippines occasionally as scientists. We call them balik scientists. Balik means returning scientists, and it kind of brought in more young people into that hands-on experience of creating these difficult systems. It's a discipline that we learned, right? Perhaps more than the satellite itself is that discipline that one learns in how to build something that has some trade-offs. Well, you have limited time, perhaps limited budget, but then it has to work. And then it has to work according to our objectives, to capture this and that, etc. So small satellites, we learned that discipline. It's a good path to follow. We talk about building products for Earth, but building products for space, you basically build stuff and it has to work. You forget about it because it's either impossible or too impractical to go back and fix it. So building high reliability products, such as for space, will open the door for building products across different industries. In the Philippines, we are trying to also revive this a stronger industrial capacity. And space opens the door for a country to build that kind of, not just a base, but a more vibrant manufacturing industry. So small satellites is at that sweet spot, I should say, where you can get young students involved, their curiosity gets satisfied, but at the same time engage some local companies in the Philippines to contribute some components, contribute some ideas as well. So it allows you to get started on building a manufacturing and space industrial base. And because you cooperate with other countries as you build a small satellite, then you also get started on that road of building these linkages and strengthening cooperation with other countries. So yeah, those are things we've learned. Building specifically Diwata 1 and Diwata 2, where we sent the students to Japanese universities. And this continues now. We have taken what we learned from the Japanese universities, we've cascaded it to the universities in the Philippines, and now they're building these small satellites out of the local laboratories, having dialogues with local companies, having dialogues with space-adjacent industries in the Philippines. And it has opened doors for us.
So what doors would you eventually like to open, Dr. Marciano? Where do you see your space program growing to?
Well, it is that, I guess, first of all, that consistency of that effort. When we started this microsatellite program, we were able to do it once, or maybe twice, but then it doesn't really matter if we can't keep doing it and getting better at it and innovating along the way. So we remind ourselves of that. So try to be consistent in that effort, but aim for improvement. And improvement can come in many ways. It could be new missions that satellite is carrying. It could be some new experimental components that you want to test out in space and bring it to a higher technology readiness level. It could be a new partner. This time, some local small, medium enterprise in the Philippines that's built a small solar panel that you could bring, or some sensor is now in that satellite. So those kinds of steps, I think, just being able to focus on that and deliver on it is speaks of a program that is maturing and gaining strength. In the Philippines, the way we communicate our space program as well is we've adopted and adapted this space data value chain. And in this value chain, its components and their nexus, where you try to build strength in each of these components, and at the end of that, you create socioeconomic benefit and value. Right? So in the first part of that chain would be these upstream technologies, the satellites, things that you build to bring them up there, things that keep them up there, the spaceports and rockets that bring the satellites to orbit. Okay, those are capital-intensive investments. But then when we put things in space, we derive benefit from it. Right? We get services, we get data, we get information, we get connectivity. That's the downstream. And the highlight, understandably, for a country like the Philippines is in that downstream. We have a phrase for this. It's called space data mobilization. So much so that in our space agency, one division, it has that name, Space Data Mobilization and Applications Division. And that really touches the lives of people, because that's where you mobilize satellite images, the aftermath of a landslide, for example, and then you use techniques like machine learning to plot the building footprints and overlay it on that map, and you give it to emergency responders, and the idea is to help them try to look for the survivors and in the rescue and recovery efforts using these maps. And we've seen them holding our maps in the Philippines. We've seen how the Environment Department addressed illegal mining in the country with the use of satellite images and information on the ground. To their credit, they take action on it. And that is the valley of death in this value chain. No matter how good we are in building infrastructure in space and building manpower and capacity and having the infrastructure to get data from these satellites, process them, do value adding in generating these nice maps, if nobody uses these maps, if nobody applies them, nobody makes a decision based on these maps, then we cannot really have that socioeconomic benefit and value. So that's been a focus for us, is partnerships. So I know I've gone a long way addressing your question, but it's really important for us as we communicate our space program and our aspirations to talk about this chain. So the idea is to build commensurate strength in each block of this chain. You identify where you're strong, identify where the gaps are. And there you go, you seek international cooperation to try to build up capacities, address some of these gaps. There are technologies that are available, there are technologies that are in the development stage, and there's plenty of opportunity in our minds for Filipinos to contribute to these frontiers. And so at the end of that, when you are able to use these products from space and the value adding that you do is appreciated by other groups, we remind ourselves we're just a space agency. We're not the ones making decisions on climate change, on the environment, on food security, and what to do in disasters. So those partnerships are essential. And when they get to use this capability, then it motivates more investments in the first part of that chain. Because now we talk about what will our country need, not just now, but in the next few years. What will we need in the next decade? What will we need in the foreseeable or even an unforeseeable future? Try to plot that out. So that's kind of the approach, is by driving this utilization, the value creation and partnerships, then you create that socioeconomic benefit and value that feeds into investments into these blocks of the chain, and also positions the Philippines for cooperating and collaborating better with other countries.
Well, so interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Joel Marciano. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here.